Welcome to Hamfest and Ham Sunday Club. My name is Dave Watson and I'm going to be reading you a little excerpt from my novel In the Devil's Name, which is all about Sawney Beane. Griff lay on his bed in his room, trying to read the book he'd swiped from Mr. Galbraith's history class earlier on that day. He'd attempted to get into it when he'd come stumbling home after his afternoon spent with Sam, Cairnsey and Phil, but the lager and hash he'd ingested had sent him to sleep halfway down the first page. He'd woken a few hours later with a thumping headache and a hellish thirst. He checked his digital bedside clock, 2 a.m. Griffith's Hall, the seat of his family for centuries, was deathly quiet. Not so much as the normal groans and creaks an old house normally makes as it settles and cools in the night could be heard. The only other people currently in the huge property were the two live-in housekeepers. His father was away on business as usual, and his mother was staying at their second home in Glasgow for the weekend, enjoying yet another of her frequent shopping trips. Griff put the book aside and got up from his bed. He walked across the bedroom, which was clawed with piles of books on every subject from history and physics to philosophy and chaos theory, and stood gazing out over the expansive moonlit grounds of the house, the town of Ballantrae below, and the darkling water beyond. During the day, the large bay window gave an excellent viewpoint out onto the Firth of Clyde. And on a clear night, you could see scarlights glimmering faintly on the Isle of Arran, miles across the cold water. On other nights, when the sky was cloudless, Griff would sometimes spend hours with one eye glued obsessively at the powerful telescope he now stood beside, studying the far-off stars and planets, and reluctantly stopping only when the coming of dawn caused the awesome light show of the cosmos to fade. Astronomy was another of his many fascinations. Tonight, though, Griff gazed less skyward and more inland in the direction of the Nine Head, a series of tall cliffs a few miles north up the coastal road, and thought about the camping trip that he, Sam, Cairnsey and Phil would plan for tomorrow to celebrate the end of high school. Everyone who lived in the area knew the local legend of Sawney Beane, the 17th century mass murderer and cannibal who, along with his inbred family, had supposedly inhabited the caves below Benin Head and preyed on late-night travellers. Some people said that over 1,000 souls perished at the hands of Beane and his diabolical brood. Cairnsey's elder brother Grant used to scare the crap out of them when they were kids, with stories of him and his mates encountering ghosts on the road at Benin Head, and in the haunted caves themselves, where some local youths would sometimes go for a drink and a smoke from time to time. And Grant wasn't the only one who had stories to tell. Griff's descendants, the Earls of Ayrshire, had lived in the area for several generations, were locally recognised as the authority on the Sawney Beane myth. His great-grandfather had published a book on the subject, and the family did little to quell rumours and whispers that the Griffiths family had actually been involved in the eventual capture of the monstrous Beane and his clan. They would just smile and wink if you ever asked them. His grandfather was especially legendary in the village for his storytelling. His most famous fable, and Griff's favourite, involved the man himself. Griff could still remember with clarity the first time his grandfather had told him the tale, sitting on his lap in the library of Griffiths Hall one stormy night when he was only 5 years old. The wind had been blowing a gale outside. The big library had been lit only by the blazing logs in the large open fireplace in front of which they sat. His grandfather's intense blue eyes, unfaded by age, regarding him piercingly through a haze of pleasant-smelling pipe smoke, and his papery, rasping voice shone out all other distractions, lest the story be taken lightly or without dire warning. Returning home from an evening of debauchery in Girvan one cold winter's eve in the year 1942, the story went, Alexander Griffiths, accompanied by a friend of his by the name of Joe Crawford, had stopped to rest in the Bren Head area. So there we were, Dean. Me and old Joe sitting on a boulder just above the cliffs at Bren Head. It was late, way past midnight, dark and bitter cold. Snow had been coming down, a howling blizzard earlier. The ground was buried under a foot of powder all around us. We were having a good pint, to be honest with you, feeling the effects of a few drams. I turned to pass my hip flask to Joe. There's this young lassie coming towards us along the road, 30 yards away. She was walking the same direction we'd just come before stopping. Look at that lassie, I said to Joe. She shouldn't be wandering about this time of night. And I started walking over to her to ask what she thought she was up to, going for a stroll in weather like that at 1 in the morning. I mean, the lassie looked like she couldn't have been more than 15. Once I started walking over though, I realised there'd been nobody on the road behind me and old Joe when we last stopped for a smoke. See, in those days it was a straight path between Girvan and Ballantrae. There were no other roads joining on between the two towns, so she couldn't have joined the road me and Joe were on from another one. There were no other villages between the two towns either, just big forest on one side of the road, and the sea on the other. I turns to mention this to Joe, but I saw from the look in his face he might have been thinking the same thing, so I just stands there watching as the girl gets closer to us. I could see that she looked scared. She kept glancing over to the side of the road at the cliff tops, as if she could hear or see something there. Then she starts to walk a bit faster, starts running towards us. And as she got closer, I could see she was dressed old-fashioned like. A heavy scarf over her head, thick woolen shawl, a long sackcloth dress. But now the young lassie was only about 10 yards away, still hurrying towards us. But she hadn't so much as looked at me or Joe, as if she couldn't even see us. She's looking more scared than ever, as if the devil himself were after her. I caught sight of something moving at the edge of the forest, on the other side of the road just ahead of the lassie. And I looked a bit closer there. First I couldn't see much, just shadows and trees. Then I make out the shape of something coming out of the darkness there, heading straight for the girl. Like a flash, 3 men came screaming out onto the road, and they're on her before I can so much as shout out to the lassie. I turns to old Joe and see him looking at the cliff top, his face as pale as the snow, his mouth hanging open. There were another 2 men crawling over the ledge. They were all naked as the day they were born, skinny, covered in streaks of filth, long hair all the way down their backs, tangled beards that covered their chests. Worst thing though was the daggers they had. It was a clear night and the moon was full, reflecting off the snow, so you could see that the daggers weren't made of steel, they were white, as if they were made from bone. 2 that came over the cliff joined the 3 from the trees. They fell on that poor lassie like a pack of wolves. She didn't even get a chance to scream. I'll not tell you what they did to her then, because you'd have nightmares and your mother'd have my guts for garters. I wish I'd never seen it myself, because I still have bad dreams now and then. I'll never forget that one scream that lassie managed to get out before they dragged her over the edge of the cliff. It wasn't the scream of a woman who'd had a mouse run over her toes, not even the scream of a woman giving birth to a bairn. It was a scream like she'd caught a glimpse of hell and knew her very soul was lost. It was a scream you might make when you know you're about to be eaten by a monster. And she was gone. The men that grabbed that poor lassie hadn't even looked at me and Joe, just like the lassie. It was as if they didn't even see we were there. After a wee minute or so standing there shaking, I got my legs working again. I walks over to the spot where they'd fell on her. There was nothing on the road there. No blood, no bits of the lassie's dress, nothing. Besides, snow on the ground hadn't been disturbed. Save for the footprints me and old Joe had made leading back the way we'd come. The foot of fresh snow on the ground wasn't touched. "Are we at Benane Head, Alex?" Joe asks me. "I think so, Joe," I said back. Well, that was all it took. We ran like hares the rest of the way back to town without stopping, or even looking back over our shoulders, in fear of God of what we might see behind us. I'll never walk past Benane Head at night again. Heaven help you if you do. Alexander Griffiths had been well known locally for that and many other fables, many of which were collected over his long and colourful life. Despite being the heir to an earl, therefore exempt from national service, he'd volunteered at the age of 19, and in his time fighting in the war, seeing action in France and Holland, winning citations for valour. After the war was over, he travelled extensively through India and Africa as a travel writer, before returning to Ballantrae to take up his ailing father's place as Earl of Ayrshire, and to run the many family businesses. He'd often hold court down in the Douglas Arms Tavern, telling tales of his many adventures to a room full of captivated locals, while he sat there at his spot which no one ever dared invade, next to the huge open fire, smoking his pipe of aromatic shag, and knocking back Talliker whisky. Griff missed the old guy sorely. Alexander Griffith's remarkable journey through life had come to an ironically unremarkable end when he'd been suddenly taken by a devastating stroke last winter. Griff had been bereft. As long as he could remember, his grandfather had been there, and had been the main father figure in his life. His actual father was a cold, rarely seen presence, with whom Griff shared little in either character or interests. As he stood in his dimly lit bedroom, looking out over the moonlit coastline, Griff decided that as long as he was up and awake, he might as well start getting his stuff together for the camping trip tomorrow. Almost as he had the thought, a slight draught from somewhere stirred the hair at the back of his neck. His grandfather's words whispered in his mind again. "I've never walked past Benane Head at night again. Heaven help you if you do." Griff felt a shiver run the length of his spine. He couldn't help but turn to look around his bedroom, half expecting to see his dead grandfather standing in the corner. That's from In the Devil's Name. Thanks for listening.